I would like to welcome everyone to Victory Theater's bare-bone production of Backstory, an evening of true stories, poetry, and flights of fancy. I'm Rashim Cannad, and I'll be your host. The way Backstory works is we invite storytellers and poets, and in tonight's case, a songwriter, to write a new piece for the theme of the show, and the theme is always the title of a memorable play or movie. Participants can write true personal stories, they can write fiction, they can write about the themes of the play or the characters in the movie, or they can just use the words of the title as a prompt. When we did Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, one storyteller told the story of his cat. Tonight's theme, A Raisin in the Sun. A Raisin in the Sun. Do you know where the playwright and screenwriter Lorraine Hansberry found that title? It's from a poem by renowned American poet Langston Hughes. The poem is called Harlem. Some know it as A Dream Deferred. Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? When I first heard the title Raisin in the Sun, I recognized the line right away. I remember being a young boy telling my mother that I knew where the title came from before I sat down and watched the movie with her for the first time late one night. I knew the line because I had memorized the poem for a school project. We had to memorize a poem by a great American writer, and I chose Harlem because it was short. I mean, why make life harder than it has to be, right? Though I may have chosen the piece because it was easy, it has come back to me many times in life when it was not. A dream deferred. It's important to note that Hughes is not asking about a dream broken or a dream lost, but a dream deferred, a dream delayed, pushed back but still alive. Maybe it's dried up a little like a raisin and not as juicy as a grape anymore, but still something to eat. Maybe it's festering, being infected by the world around it. Maybe it's even rotting, but it's still alive. Or does it explode? That's where we come in on Walter Lee Younger in Hansberry's play. His dreams have been deferred for so long that he just can't stand it anymore. He's ready to explode. And he's so far gone that he can't see that if he does, the blast will take everything and everyone around him with it. Walter Lee believes that this insurance check from the death of his father, this $10,000, is his last chance at fulfilling a dream. And so, he can't miss it. When Phil Rose, the producer of the original play Raisin in the Sun, tried to shop the show around, even after it had had some success, even with Sidney Poitier as the lead, he ran into problems because those he described as white wealthy people did not connect with Walter Lee at all. To them, he was not a sympathetic character. Rose, who is white, obviously didn't agree. Phil Rose had known Lorraine Hansberry since they were very young. They met at a summer camp where Hansberry was working as a waitress. He said that he knew she was much more than a waitress when he began to hear her speak. After the summer, Lorraine started to share her writing with Phil. Phil recalls when he first heard A Raisin in the Sun as part of a group reading at Lorraine's apartment. The play wasn't even finished at the time. Rose says, "I went home, tried to go to sleep, but couldn't." Rose called Hansberry very early the next morning. "I want to produce your play," he said. "I want to do it on Broadway." "I didn't know enough to know that was impossible," he confesses. Phil Rose had never produced a play before, but he had connections because he had earned some success as a music producer. Sometimes it's good not to know what you don't know. At first, Rose couldn't get the play into a theater in New York, much less on Broadway. He had to take the show on a tour of smaller venues, but the success in these places was not enough. The show had to prove its worth in a big market, and there was no tougher big market than Philadelphia. Rose took the show to Philly, and day after day, the audience grew bigger and blacker. Lloyd Richards, the director of A Raisin in the Sun, and the man who became the first black director on Broadway because of A Raisin in the Sun, wanted to have a better understanding of why the play was having such success. He asked an older black woman who was buying a ticket why she would spend so much money that was a sacrifice for her, on a ticket to this show. According to Richards, the woman replied, "The people where I live tell me that something's going on down here, and it concerns me." The success in Philadelphia opened the door for the play, and A Raisin in the Sun premiered on Broadway at the Ethel Barrymore Theater on March 11th, 1959. The show was an enormous success. It won the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best American Play. Lorraine Hansberry was the first African American to win the award, and at the age of 29, she was the youngest person to have ever won the award at the time. Even with the grand success of the play, Rose and Hansberry ran into a number of issues getting the movie made. Unlike in theater and film, it's the studios that have the final say, as we see with what's going on now, not the writer. So some of the harsher realities and more political stances taken in the original play were softened for the big screen. Still, Hansberry said that she was happy with the final film. Even today, whenever there is an attempt to revive A Raisin in the Sun, it is inevitably asked whether the play is still relevant. Thankfully, there's usually someone with enough recognition to answer with a categorical yes. But I do understand why some might not recognize how contemporary the issues faced by the younger family continues to be. Today, the younger family is much more hidden in our society. With the growth of the black middle class and the emergence of high-profile black celebrities and sports stars, many in society fail to realize that the wealth gap between blacks and whites in this country is just as drastic today as it was in 1959 when A Raisin in the Sun made its Broadway premiere. I don't want to bore you with statistics, but I will give you one. The typical white family has nearly 10 times the wealth of the typical black family. Now, life is full of problems for all of us. There's no doubt about it. But imagine having to manage your problems with 1/10 of the resources. The reason the wealth gap hasn't improved, despite the appearance of advancement, is manyfold. The simplest answer is you have to have money to make money. And black people were not allowed to accumulate wealth at the times when the nation was having its greatest success. And as the nation continues to grow, there have always been those who fight against opportunities to help level the playing field. Recently, the Supreme Court ended race-based affirmative action programs for higher education, even as legacy programs continue. In other words, you can't get special consideration for being part of a historically excluded group, but you can get special consideration for having a family member attend the university while that group was being excluded. And so, progress, like many dreams, continues to be deferred. For me, one of the most powerful scenes in the movie A Raisin in the Sun comes just after Walter Lee Younger, the movie's pivotal character, gets swindled out of the insurance money that everyone is counting on to help realize their dream. At this point, Walter is devastated, almost doubled over in shame and despair. But that doesn't keep Beneatha, the younger sister, from going at him hard, until she is stopped by Lena, her mother, and the matriarch of the family. Lena asks Beneatha, "Have you cried for that boy today? I don't mean for yourself and for the family because we lost the money. I mean for him, what he'd been through, and what it done to him. Have you cried for that boy today?" That always gets me. That always gets me, because no one cries for Walter Lee. Not then, not now. If you watch the movie, you may have cried for Sidney Poitier, but no one cries for Walter Lee. Walter Lee, who was born of rape and toil. Walter Lee, whose body is the most murdered, the most exploited, and the most imprisoned.
Yeah.
Walter Lee, whose mind is the most dismissed, the most poached, and the most suppressed. Walter Lee, a human being, a man whose dreams have dried up, festered, rotted, and crusted over for as long as he's existed. No one cries for Walter Lee, and that's why A Raisin in the Sun is one of the most important American plays ever written. Lorraine Hansberry, for the first time on any stage or any screen, didn't just cry for Walter Lee. She saw Walter Lee. And told a piece of his story. And she saw Lena and Ruth and Benitha and told a piece of their story, all with depth and honesty and compassion. So in a short while, I would like to tell you a bit about Lorraine's story. But first, I would like to get off of the stage. I'd like to tell you a little more about the playwright and screenwriter of A Raisin in the Sun, Lorraine Hansberry, because I don't think many people know much about her, and she happens to be one of my personal writing heroes. May 19th, 1930, Chicago, Illinois, Lorraine Hansberry was born. Another writer was born on May 19th in Philadelphia many years later. That writer is me. I remember when I first learned that Lorraine Hansberry and I share a birthday. I mean, I understand that millions of people share my birthday. It's not exactly the same as hitting this billion-dollar lottery or anything, but I took it to mean something. See, I had always felt a connection to Miss Hansberry because her play, A Raisin in the Sun, had a profound effect on me. Now, I don't claim to be as brilliant as Lorraine Hansberry, but she and I certainly saw writing and storytelling in a similar way. During an interview that took place around the time A Raisin in the Sun made its debut on Broadway, Lorraine said, "Serious drama, sooner or later, has to become involved with its time." In scripting A Raisin in the Sun, Hansberry wrote a piece that has spanned more than 6 decades. Even by the time I had seen the film, more than 30 years after its premiere, it was the only drama that I felt captured many aspects of what was happening in my own home in an honest way. A Raisin in the Sun wasn't autobiographical for Hansberry. She was raised in a middle-class family, and her father, Carl Augustus Hansberry, actually managed apartment buildings much like the one where the younger family lives in the play. Chicago, however, was very segregated at the time, and the tenants of her father's building were also young Lorraine's neighbors. And she was a witness to the lives of many of the struggling families who lived in her community. It's why she could write so honestly about them and their lives. It's why Lorraine's South Side of Chicago, Langston's Harlem, and my West Philadelphia could recognize each other's truth through distance and time. And though Lorraine didn't live the life of the Youngers, her family did face the same barriers that inspired the central conflict in that family in the play. When Lorraine was 7 years old, her father bought a house in Woodlawn, a white area of Chicago that had restrictive covenants barring sales of homes to African Americans. But Carl Hansberry, an activist in his own right, moved his family into the home anyway because he felt it was the correct thing to do. Recalling that time, Lorraine says, "My memories of this correct way of fighting white supremacy included being spat at, cursed, and pummeled on the daily trek to and from school." One night, a white crowd gathered outside of the family's new home, and Lorraine, all of 7 years old, was sitting on a love seat when one of her new neighbors threw a large piece of mortar through the window, just missing her and lodging itself in the wall. A few months later, the Hansberry were forced to leave their home by court order, an order that was upheld by the Illinois Supreme Court. So Carl Hansberry appealed the decision all the way to the Supreme Court. The case was the matter of Hansberry versus Lee. The court unanimously rejected this specific covenant, which opened up 500 new homes in that area to potential black ownership. The court, however, did not rule that such covenants were unconstitutional. So Carl filed other cases to help end segregation in Chicago, but they all had even less success than the first. Carl had become so disillusioned with the United States that he left and bought a home for his family in Mexico City, where it is said that he felt free for the first time in his life. Lorraine, 15 by this point, stayed behind to finish her high school studies. She had planned to join her family in Mexico after she graduated, but before she could return to her family, she learned that her father had passed away due to a cerebral hemorrhage. Lorraine said, "It was the cost of emotional turmoil, time and money that led to my father's early death." Though her father was dead, his activist spirit lived on in Lorraine, who felt compelled to use her talent and her energy to fight for a more just world. One of my favorite quotes from Lorraine Hansberry speaks to this. She says, "One cannot live with sighted eyes and filling heart and not know or react to the miseries which afflict the world." Lorraine recognized that art and activism have a clear and critical partnership. Out of high school, she worked on progressive political campaigns, and she was active in the American Communist Party. Her writing career started as a journalist in the black newspaper Freedom, published by Paul Robeson. And even through her rise to fame, she continued to use her talent and her voice to help further causes that support oppressed communities. This included the gay and lesbian communities, as Hansberry identified as lesbian in her diaries and personal writings. She kept her lesbianism closeted through her life, even marrying longtime friend Robert Nemiroff. Her relationship with Nemiroff helped inspire Lorraine Hansberry's second Broadway play, The Sign in Sidney Bruce Steen's Window. In the play, Lorraine does breach the topic of homosexuality, as well as those of interracial love, race, and political corruption. After their divorce in 1957, Lorraine reached out to the Daughters of Bilitis, a San Francisco-based lesbian rights organization. She contributed multiple letters to their publication, The Ladder, but only under her initials. Some believe that Hansberry was ready to come out publicly before a battle with pancreatic cancer prematurely took her life. She was only 34 years old when she died. What an amazing 34 years, huh?